Um, Red Sox fans? Yankee fans?
It's okay.
Oh, you pre-screened. I love that. That's terrific. You got a Pirates fan? The Thank you for having me. It's good to be back. It's always good to be back here. This I was sharing with Mark. We were talking a bit about some different topics that might interest you, and obviously AI kind of is always sort of top of mind these days. I gave this presentation or a slight version of this presentation back in I think it was November of last year, maybe in early December, to a group of about 700 investors down in North Carolina. And we were kind of talking about sort of, the role of AI. And obviously for all of you, I'm sure you have tremendous intimacy. I was actually talking to my boss today, who's our CFO, and I said that I was just curious. I said, how often do you use, different AI products? And he's like, yeah, I never do. And I said, I go, well, I'm going to become your best friend because I am now officially like an AI junkie. I'm sort of like to AI as my kids are like Instagram. So I've got a great appreciation for like some of the things that I use it for. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But more importantly, I'm going to try to talk about what it means to all of you. And it just as one company, but as Liz knows, we're part of a group we call Boston CIO, which is about 80 or so CIOs from the largest companies in New England, and also part of a broader group of about 1,500 around the country. And we talk about these topics quite a bit in terms of what's hot, how we're solving certain problems. But as it pertains to AI, what's really fascinating is in the last, like, say, 4 months since I gave that last presentation, like there was a period of time where I think people were having this question about whether AI was legit or whether it was going to be a significant trend or whether we're still sort of like not clear. And I really hope that's been kind of put to rest because, for me personally, I literally probably spend a good probably 10% of my job right now focused on different AI related activities and things that we're looking at. So I'm a big proponent of the technology. As you guys know, probably, ChatGPT, the most amazing thing is it literally only turned one when I gave this presentation. It just turned one. It's now one in 4 months or so. But to think that a product like that, a Gen AI product is just over 1 year's old is remarkable. And like I've had the opportunity of, I'll actually show you. So this is a little bit of my background. I won't go into the details. Bentley was just to the left of this on your screen, I guess. And so I've had an opportunity to, as a software engineer, I worked full time my last 2 years at Bentley writing software for companies, and I kind of knew what I loved, and I kind of practice that to this day, actually. So I really sort of like to write software, I like to design systems, and I say a lot of the things I'm talking about today are really more from a practitioner perspective in many ways. I've led groups for many years as CTO at like Scudder and then FTD and Weather Channel and the Red Sox and others, but really kind of, I say these more is sort of, I feel like we're at another inflection point, and these don't occur very often. And this is a great example. I love this slide because it really kind of, in my mind, really begins to kind of show just the kind of trajectory that I think we kind of expect. I actually tend to think of kind of this AI revolution, if you will, as not all that different from an industrial revolution. I think it's going to be that impactful in terms of what it means to our economy, to jobs that all of you have in the future, to my job, and also, frankly, to the kinds of skills that companies are going to be looking for. It's going to be profound. We all hear about, there's going to be job loss and there'll be job gain, and I think that's very true. I think you could very much say the same thing about web and mobile, kind of in that space. But the one thing I think is very clear is, information workers and those that are, skilled in terms of being good change agents. A lot of like CIOs and CTOs, when we look for talent, we look for people with different domain skills. But I think you're going to see, and I was having this conversation with IBM, you're going to see that even more so than that in the future, we're going to be looking for good athletes. People who can sort of pivot, who can learn, if you learn one skill and then as we adapt and move to different, whether it's software skills or other sort of skills, the people who can sort of adjust and pivot quickly, I think are going to be the ones that are successful in this new future model. In part because it's changing so rapidly, it's impossible for us to kind of put a stake in the ground. And so, I guess if you thought things were changing quickly, you'll be very surprised. My suspicion will be in the next few years because things are really, really ramping up. When I talk to some of my peers, everyone's got, a handful of pilots on the drawing board right now. And although it's still new, because it absolutely is, and we've done a lot of testing, and I would still say that we haven't, cured cancer with this yet, we're like remarkably close in a few areas. And so I'm very kind of bullish, I guess, as it pertains to how we think about AI. And by the way, this is a small group. Absolutely, feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have as I'm kind of going through all this. So please feel free to kind of interrupt me. One of the reasons I'm also super bullish, not just about AI, but sort of this next generation, is that, when I was your age here at Bentley and I was going to school, it wasn't clear what the next generation was, candidly. We didn't, the internet wasn't really available. I mean, yeah, we're using computers, but even computers, we're still early stage in many ways. And so, but the thing that's remarkable is when you start thinking about sort of future tech and the impact it's going to have on all of your careers and on all of our respective businesses and things, almost all the technology is already out and available. We're just in refinement mode in many cases. And what's exciting about that is that typically means is that the acceleration points are going to be exponentially faster because you don't have to sort of invent things first. A lot of these inventions exist. We're kind of going to be in kind of refinement mode. I'm sure all of you have been playing with different forms of AI, and it's remarkable. I mean, I literally, I'm positive I don't go a week without sort of experimenting kind of with a different new AI product, in another kind of niche area. And I could literally go on with all the different examples, whether it's video or audio or all these different kinds of unique use cases that are coming out. But it's going to be a really fascinating time over the next 3 to 5 years as these kind of technologies kind of bloom. And what's exciting, as I said before, is that all these exist today. It's just a matter of kind of refinement. We obviously see Google Glasses and quantum computing, and even if you want to be like Elon Musk, you can get your own brain chip. I think they insert those right after this class. And then and obviously robotics and things. We know Boston Dynamics. Chad went to Bentley as well, and obviously seen Spot from Boston Dynamics. You get a better sense for how quickly the field of robotics is advancing. Another way of thinking about this is how quickly it's taken for in this particular case, ChatGPT, to really kind of gain adoption. This is how long it's taken to get to 100 million users. And you think of LinkedIn or the World Wide Web, and you think, oh my God, 7 years. And you're now these are going to be measured in months. In the future, I suspect you'll have some things in weeks. So the world's changing quick. And this is just a great illustration of just how quickly it's changing and how quickly adoption is taking place. Oh yeah, automobiles took 75 years, by way of example. Without getting, AI, in the definition of AI, is kind of loosely coupled. I think one of the elements we all talk about is artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is kind of like universal intelligence if you think about it at sort of a human level. And to me, honestly, that's not the most important. That's not the most important thing by a long shot in my mind. People argue quite a bit about sort of when that reality is, and some will say in 3 years and some will say in 50. I don't honestly care as much about that one as I care about sort of all the other advancements that are going to have to go along before we get to that phase. I think what you're going to see, because we're seeing it already, is, some people look at sort of OpenAI and they might think wow, these guys are going to be the winners in this big race. But at the end of the day, if I were still putting money down, I'd be looking at sort of the Googles and Microsofts and NVIDIAs and others that are spending billions of dollars of R&D in these different spaces. I also think what you're going to see is that, in a way, you'll see sort of generic AI across, who knows what percentage, call it 80%. We'll call it the 80-20 rule, around 80%. And then you're going to see a whole, plethora of companies that fill in the void, that are specialists in different areas, video, audio, text, kind of you name it type of thing. And then eventually my suspicion is, if it follows the same path as past history, those will get acquired by some of the larger companies and will kind of be in a little bit of the same cycle that we've been in the past. But anyway, so AI, is quite real. This is a great example of how quickly things are moving when you think about it from just almost like a general AI perspective. We have a tendency to think of AI as sort of open AI or, Gen AI. Although, we would argue, for many of us have been doing it for years, whether we call it machine learning or AI. And I'll show you some examples of some of the things that we've been doing, with machine learning over the years. It's a rapidly kind of evolving business. It's much broader than just sort of what we think of as LLMs and, Gen AI-like examples and things. And so if you can sort of get a better sense here for how quickly the advancements are occurring and the quality of chips, especially from like NVIDIA's and others, are evolving, it's a pretty remarkable business and really kind of bodes well, I think, for all of you in terms of your respective careers. The challenge is that you're only as good as your models. I actually feel like I took this from my lab. I was at the Weather Channel for many years, and like every so often we would show a hurricane track. It looks something like this, maybe not quite this disorganized, but these models effectively determine sort of how effective these things are. And when you guys read a lot, there's always that sort of question about, is sort of this a threat or an opportunity? Are you going to look more like Arnold or Albert, kind of thing in terms of what this means in our future? And I was just sort of looking at some examples. There's a lot of pessimism out there. This is kind of how I love this art little thing. So this is, if AI were kind of thinking about Wizard of Oz, it'd be transported to a surreal landscape. A young girl kills the first person she meets and then teams up with three strangers to kill again. I sort of feel like there's far too much pessimism on what we're seeing out there. My concern with AI is probably principally focused on sort of cyber threat and risk. And the good news there is that AI also creates opportunities on the cyber front. But I'll let you here's some experts who would tell you. So if you know some of these guys like Eric Schmidt, you got to love somebody who like quotes Nagasaki and Hiroshima to like start off on a good foot. So humans will remain in charge, which is the good news there, I guess. Elon Musk, who's always good for like a happy ending here. It's like it'll destroy humanity, of course, without rethinking about it. Just like we would step on an anthill. Kind of thing. So these are very encouraging. By the way, these are the same people who helped found OpenAI, and Tesla would consider themselves an AI company of sorts. I love the one from Meta. That's by the way, that cat is sort of I was using some AI product and asked for like an evil cat, and so I sort of created. I've been creating animals. My kids think I'm crazy, just sort of with all the different tools that are out there now. But the point here is that like whether we think it's smart as a cat, or it's ready to kind of conquer the world. I guess the point really is that what I think is, a lot of times, scientists and engineers will say something like this I believe, and because they feel like they probably are doing much of the same things in their own labs, and that's all well and good, and that's great. I think what OpenAI has done though is, it's like shine a light on the art of the possible, so it's no longer kind of in the domains of some R&D lab where a bunch of engineers are like all high-fiving about some successes. I think what they really did is they kind of cooked a little like cloaking device off of AI, and as a result of that, the amount of infusement of investment in terms of what they've been able to kind of showcase has really been transformational. I mean, I tend to associate, I'll just flip forward here to like Paul Doherty here. So artificial will reach human levels. I'm not sure when that is. This is his opinion, but the point really is, we're going to experience a tremendous amount of rapid acceleration, and I'll give you some examples of that in just a couple seconds. Interestingly enough, I did a little survey. Speaking of our Inspire CIO friends, Liz, we did a survey recently. We're just kind of asking CIOs around the country, some thousand CIOs, what their thoughts were about Gen AI and its impact on the business. And 93% of them were extremely positive about it, and that's kind of how I look at it. Yeah, there's risks. And there's always sort of concerns, but I feel like we can effectively safeguard against those. It's going to raise the bar with cyber and education and awareness and frankly, employees like all of you guys in the very near future in your careers, because we're going to be expecting more from folks. I kept this slide, interestingly, this was part of the same survey. What I thought was interesting about it is where people think AI is going to have the biggest impact. And if you think about it, like people like, and I would tend to agree with this, our biggest focus right now is on employee productivity. There's a lot of things we're doing on the baseball side that I won't get into a lot of details there. It's probably a little bit more around machine learning than it is around kind of Gen AI. But we're really focused on how can we make our employees more efficient is kind of really the starting point. And part of the reason for that, besides getting value for doing things, is that if our employees operate more efficiently and more effectively, for us it's creating a greater fan experience, which is kind of really kind of how we kind of view the world here, is that we want to make going to Fenway Park and the Red Sox game, a highly memorable experience. And so we sort of feel like giving the information to all of our employees to effectively work with all of you if you come to a game. or just doing a more efficient job in their own respective areas is kind of highest on our list. It's also an area where you can kind of fail and not fail miserably or fail visibly in the marketplace. So we'll test a lot of these things internally. We have a roadmap of different use cases that kind of range between sort of like both value, we do both an index of value as well as risk, if you will. And so we'll obviously kind of cut our teeth and kind of eat our own dog food internally. And then once we feel good about it, we'll then kind of expose it more probably to the media in certain cases next. And then we'll ultimately make it available to fans. Because obviously I think all of you have seen very much when you put information out there that's erroneous, it tends to kind of backfire pretty phenomenally. So there's kind of a crawl, walk, run methodology leveraging our employee workforce. I mentioned challenges. These are what I think of when I think of the challenges around AI. Security, privacy, and misinformation is a big deal. You read all the time now about different types of examples of where, things kind of became problems. Company the other day talked about, signing over money after being on a Zoom call with fake people, type of thing. And so we're really kind of going to have to evolve. One of the things I literally had a conversation about today is I think you're going to see more companies adopting almost like a military-like approach where they might have different sort of like challenge words or code words for things so that you don't do certain things unless the other person can reciprocate a certain agreed upon sort of term and things like that. Something that wouldn't be obvious to anybody else type of thing. So I think we're going to have to come up with other ways to continue to evolve, but, I think we'll be able to kind of do that fairly effectively. We talk about hallucinations and, misses, if you will, when LLMs and how we can sort of continue to sort of test and hopefully do a better job of those things. The one thing that was just fascinating, I didn't bring an example, unfortunately I should have, is that I gave a company a test the other day. I gave one of our, a handful of our documents. We have different technology, I'll say statistics that we use, every baseball game, and I gave it to this company and asked them I want to be able to ask any question of these documents, and we have documents that go back 20 years in a kind of similar format. These are kind of media documents that we provide to the press and others, and they ran it against 5 different Gen AI tools, and I thought what was fascinating about it was like the success rate. And so if I look at it, I think it was, ChatGPT, maybe 3.5 or something version. And they ran 5 different versions of this against Gemini and a bunch of others. And what you find is that, some of one of this example in ChatGPT, it was successful. There were 40 questions that they posed. It was successful in the first 15, perfect answers. And then it went to a couple hallucinations. Some it didn't, some it didn't know, and some it had half right answers. And if you look at say Gemini, it would do a better job in other areas of the questions. And it kind of struck me at, which I'd never thought of before, is that I can also see us creating models where we did something like this at the Weather Channel, where you create almost an ensemble, so I can see in the future also being sort of using multiple Gen AI solutions to solve a single problem, depending upon the nature of the problem. So anyways, it's an evolving kind of capabilities. This whole issue about job elimination, I think is real. I think people underplay it a little bit. I don't mean that as a doom and gloom model at all. I think new jobs will be absolutely created, no different than the internet. So it'll be, but I think the one trend you'll see is there going to be information jobs more and more. And so I do feel like education is going to become even more important, especially being able to kind of be the kind of employees that can sort of adapt and adjust kind of as the technology kind of evolves. And the government will have to play a role here. This is, very similar to what you might have seen recently in Europe, where they kind of passed some first, ever kind of rules around some of AI. That there is some validity to doing that, not that dissimilar to GDPR and other sort of data privacy solutions. So I also heard someone say, so you guys are aware, what prevents a lot of companies, I thought it was a great quote, he said, what prevents a lot of companies from adopting AI isn't faster processors or how many GPUs they can kind of work against on a particular, AI item, type engine. It's a lot of it's policy. I started authoring the policy for our companies, and man, I got to tell you, it's one of the hardest things I've ever written in my life, and we're not fully done with it yet. And we're trying to come up with a policy that operates across all of our lines of business. And that's not an easy task. And so anyways, we're working through the process, but I really feel like that's going to bind a lot of companies. And so we're spending a lot of time with legal and other groups so that, so that we can build sandboxes and we can basically sort of put these things into a format that allows our organization to learn, to grow, to innovate in a safe kind of and secure manner. So that's a little bit of kind of the world that we kind of live in. I mentioned AI is more than just Gen AI. You probably heard that, we're moving to a model with automated strike zones and things. All these things are only possible by some of the machine learning that's been taking place over the last probably 8 to 10 years. It's remarkable. Like within Fenway, we have some 25 cameras in every single ballpark of 7 of our ballparks that basically focus like on something like this. They focus on every pitcher and every batter. We look at, and it basically the cameras shoot over 300 frames a second. So you can imagine this thing generates petabytes of data. What that allows you to do is to understand every single element of almost at a skeletal level. So now we can actually look at every pitcher, every batter. You can actually understand elements of detail that you could never have done before. And all of these are just different forms of, artificial intelligence. But, what it means though too is if you think about it, if you're a baseball player or, say you're a hitter, what this means to us is that we get a better sense for what your ideal swing looks like, or what your exact pitch looks like, your best pitch. And then we can continually kind of evaluate you against optimum and get a better sense for they're not pushing off the rubber hard enough, or they've got their elbow too high, or they're not turning correctly, or they're over rotating, or any number of different sort of elements that can sort of affect pitchers or batters. So it's kind of a chronic, constant, I should say, effort to kind of continue to kind of evolve so we can sort of hopefully win more games and leverage the technology to kind of get there. I'll skip some of this, but when I was talking to companies about the journey, it kind of starts with understanding it, coming up. The most important thing is coming up with use cases. Most companies kind of sometimes jump in the tech without understanding what problems they're trying to solve. We try to start with the end in mind and work our way backward a little bit. But again, I just probably take too long. This is, if I leave with no other slide, this would be a good one to remember. It used to be that we would encourage people to embrace change. Now it's sort of going to become, a prerequisite. When we have employees typically that maybe don't work out for whatever reason, it's almost always around this. It's like, we start off with a certain, say, programming language. It doesn't matter, Python, anything. We switch to something else. It's not like a request. It's like we do these things because we think they're in the best interest of our business. And so, again, if you chose a technology field thinking it wasn't going to change, you probably made a mistake. And it's going to change even more. So I think, the world will reward people who kind of want to sort of continue to embrace change. And I think it's going to be challenging for those that are, who don't. I mentioned cybersecurity is probably our biggest threat. Ransomware is on a climb. The really good news, however, is that ransom payouts are on a rapid decline. And that's only because companies have better processes, better backup, better recoveries capabilities and things, so that even when situations do occur, they have fallback. It's not necessarily always a situation where it's like, oh, we have to pay some ransomware thing in order for us to kind of get our information back. Hopefully, we're now at the point in many cases, companies, where when these things do occur, we're well positioned to be able to kind of respond to them. But it's complicated, right? This is actually a store, an online store that was out there. And you can create crazy stuff like this, and people will actually go out there and want to buy the kitten chair, and things like that. So, it is a little bit of a buyer's beware kind of marketplace that we're going to find ourselves in. You don't want to be this guy on the right. This is, Liz and I probably deal with this way too much in our respective jobs, but, despite our best efforts, people will continue to sort of give up credentials. I've got, 3 kids in their 20s. And I try to hammer on this issue all the time whenever I'm talking to them. But I also sort of feel like your generation also has a tendency to sort of freely give up information. Oftentimes, maybe not, hopefully not secure information, but it is another one of those buyer beware kind of situations. Anyway, so these are all just steps that we all take to kind of safeguard our content. The one thing that most people don't talk about, I don't know if anybody, what majors I should have asked at the beginning of what majors people have, but if you're kind of in the data field, the one thing I think companies are also coming to grips with, at least hopefully most companies, is that your AI abilities are going to be 100% limited by the quality of your data. So if you don't have highly accurate, high quality data, it doesn't matter. Your AI thing is useless or marginally useless. And so many companies, not just in sports, are actively trying to like shore this up so this does not become sort of the impediment toward keeping pace in the industry. I actually want to share a couple different slides. These slides are a little bit different. I was thinking about how to articulate how quickly things are changing and then why these efficiencies and productivity drives are so paramount. This was actually just something I was reading the other day about people employed in different sectors. And if you look at how it used to be an agrarian culture, back in the mid 1800s, and you look at how many people are now employed in services, yet despite that, like the number of people employed in agriculture is exponentially down, but output is up. If you look at manufacturing, employment's down, but output's up. The point here is the same thing is going to apply to all of you on business side, right? There may be different kinds of jobs, and things like that. But one of the things I think you're going to find with what I'm excited about with AI is that I think we're going to see a really dramatic acceleration in employee productivity. And so that the kinds of things that today could have taken you days will become measured in hours, and I'll give you a real life simple example. The other day I was putting together a job description, and it was for like a help desk manager person, and I thought, like, we were in a group, and I said, well, I'll write it. And I went home, and my wife and I were going to be going out. It was like 6 o'clock, and we were leaving at 6:30, and I said, geez, maybe I'll put a dent in that. And so I sat down. I pulled together about 10 to 12 different attributes of what I think this position should entail. And I put it into some, a Gen AI product. And I was done with my job description in 14 minutes. I timed it. And I was thinking, like, there's no way, and I've done millions of these, I think, like, there's no way I've ever written one of those unless I was copying another one like it in like under 2 hours. Because we try to make these, these are like putting our best foot forward when we talk to, prospective, employees and things. So it's a big deal. There's another example. This is like today. I was just thinking, it's amazing. This is just how I think of things, and I'm just trying to like transpose a little bit of my thinking onto all you. But like, even like when you look at sort of like petroleum production, right? All you read about oftentimes is like how we have 15% less pumps and different that are now, operating to kind of create like oil reserves. But like, oh, guess what? We're now outputting more oil products at any time in history and more than any other country in the world. And that's only because of the massive efficiencies that we've realized and things like that. And so these massive efficiencies, I guess what I'll leave you with is they're not unique to Gen AI. Like, they're occurring everywhere, like whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in, oil, production type of thing, whether it's in, services or agriculture. And Gen AI is just really kind of like the most recent one to come along that's going to have a very dramatic impact on our jobs, not just people who grow, agriculture, or people who work in manufacturing plants, or people who, pump petroleum. I think the Gen AI is a little bit of the level set as it pertains to office roles and things like that. I think it's going to have a massively profound impact. And I think, honestly, a very positive one, for folks that really kind of, take this to heart and sort of, make it part of, who they are, and, adapt to a changing lifestyle or changing environment in terms of how they think of their respective roles. And so I'll just leave you with that. I always want to leave with the Seinfeld thing. But anyways, it's a big deal, and I know you guys all fundamentally understand that. But I think I would encourage you to really sort of, not so much like I'm not suggesting everyone just like, student body lefts to like Gen AI and other tools like that. My point, though, is having a working knowledge of how these things operate. The key thing on some of those things too, which is really important, is, I'm not, is really kind of like balancing the use of products so that, this is not like sort of, in my mind, I don't think of it, especially in an academic setting, that like, oh, hey, we don't want people that are like writing their own papers or doing their own research and things like that. That's not what it's all about in my mind. It's all about sort of, in my mind, it's all about like, now there's like other sources that can complement, the way you kind of operate and how you think and how you can sort of, operate in a more efficient manner and things. And I think we're operating in kind of a world that's going to be a lot of new exploration, a lot of new things, learnings on a almost a weekly basis. So super encouraged about the future, albeit it's going to be a very different one than what we see today. I'll pause there. Let me just kind of end at that point. Maybe if you have time for questions. I don't know how we're doing, Mark, on time. Yeah.
Good.
Kind of forgot my question a little bit, but I'll try to keep it moving anyways.
Sure.
So my name's Amelia David. I'm a freshman. I know you talked about this a little bit at the end, but one of my main concerns with AI is that it would stunt an employee's ability to think critically or generate their own ideas. And I know you talked about at the end how AI isn't meant to be a complete replacement, but how do you what plans do you think that companies could implement to make sure there's an even balance of both and AI isn't doing all the work while employees just kind of sit back?
Yeah. Did anyone hear the question? It kind of a little about how do we prevent sort of AI, or how does companies sort of address the issue of maybe people leveraging AI excessively, I guess, so that we're not getting sort of some of their own thinking and things. The one thing it tends to be in corporations a little bit of self-governing, in part because it's funny. I've got another daughter who's a freshman in high school. And I have this conversation with her all the time around the use of AI tools and things. And, but to me, it's a little bit of I'm sure any of the teachers that are here know this. It's it's understanding the voice of the employee and, and things. When I look at what people submit, right now, I see people leveraging tools like Gen AI as sort of a kind of a means of supplementing, but what tends to be right now more on sort of the authoring of large documents, I would say, where I tend to see, other than the example I used with job descriptions and things like that. We're also, I didn't say this, I should have, but we're also using this against as a software developers too. So if you have an environment where you've got a style guide for how you develop your software. It can learn that now, and it's remarkably good, by the way. I think the key thing is, when I think of Gen AI, I think it's a really amazing way of getting to 60+%. It's a really quick start way of getting certain things that also kind of infuse your thinking. I kind of sometimes use it at the beginning of things where I put down some ideas, and I start writing, and then I'll look over and be like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And I kind of think of a way as in my mind, is a way of supplementing. It puts a higher, no doubt, it puts a higher premium on educators, to kind of ensure that I think what they're getting from people are the real thoughts and things. I don't know a great way. There's a lot of tools that try to understand whether someone's using Gen AI and other things. The problem is, I just read an example the other day. No sooner are people doing that than someone's comes up with a new model that prevents it from doing that. So I think that's kind of a race to the bottom. That's kind of almost a losing proposition, albeit probably a necessary one. I know in my daughter's class they do a little bit more writing in class, so that teachers get a better sense for the students' baseline. So when they read something that sounds like it came from Einstein, they can see whether that actually makes sense or not. At a work level, it tends to self-regulate in part because you kind of know whether something's over someone's head. It tends to be you don't, and I don't work in a situation it varies. If you're in the legal space, that's a little bit different. Every space has its own sort of challenges, a little bit, because if you get something wrong in the court of law, that's more problematic than getting it wrong kind of in your office and things like that. But I don't have a great answer for that, because I think we're kind of all evolving. I think the one thing that companies are doing is putting together these governance processes, and they're going to start holding people very accountable. I've got friends, I've asked these questions among them, and people are now putting things in their hiring policies, or in their employee handbooks that people have to sign that sort of acknowledge that about their use of Gen AI or other AI products, and sort of just to kind of ensure that people are not taken. The worry by the way, the worry in most corporations is not exactly the way you described it. The worry is more that they're going to inadvertently put highly sensitive information out into the public domain. and because it's a lot easier to do than it used to be. Like, you kind of know if I took content that was highly unique to the Red Sox and put it out on Twitter or X, formerly known as, I feel like someday we'll get rid of that. You kind of know you're doing something wrong. Like, I feel like we're a little bit at that point right now where someone does some of that stuff now with AI, and you can sort of fall on your sword and be like, oh, geez, I didn't realize that. And, so I feel like we're that kind of early stage education process. But I don't know. I don't know that we have great answers. I think we're just trying to put in like safeguards where we can. It's a good question. Who else has a question? Come on. Red Sox question? I'm going to win the World Series. Go ahead, Liz.
I have a question. I'm Liz. I'm the family CIO. Brian and I know each other from work. Like, I'm the Liz that he's referring to. My question is, in terms of the investments that you're making in the business, is the company investing and looking for a return on investment? Are you having to prove the efficiency? And how are you capturing the productivity increase?
Yeah, well, good questions. I'll take the first one. I would say that our spend right now on AI related is limited, is low. Like, the good news is right now we're kind of in that phase, where I probably have 8 to 10 companies working with me right now, and I'm not paying any of them any money presently. We are
Including Microsoft?
yeah, right now. Yeah, so we're dabbling with Copilot, which if you guys read about, is sort of Microsoft's, Gen AI solution. It's actually quite good. What's unique about that one that's going to be very clever is you can also kind of just aim it at your content. So, if you've got Word docs and PowerPoints and slides and, whatever, I'm skipping, spreadsheets and other things out there, you can kind of target it at that. So it actually kind of learns on your content, which is really interesting because, I like that in a way because it understands you stylistically, and it understands. So, when I tend to do PowerPoints or other things, I sort of have a certain approach to doing it. I'd love it if it could sort of help accelerate some of those processes and things. So we're doing some testing on that. You're going to see them, as you probably know, Bing was such a failure as a search engine, but it seems like it's coming back again now. So you'll start to see that kind of embedded within the Microsoft stack kind of thing. The problem with Copilot, just take a place like Bentley, do they use Google or do they use Microsoft products? Microsoft. The challenge is it's really expensive. Now maybe it'll make it inexpensive and more expensive for schools, but it's like, right now it's at $30 a month per user. And you do that math, and that math is expensive really quick, But I will just tell you a story. Like, years and years ago, I worked in the investment industry when I was CTO in an investment company, and it's kind of when browsers came out. I know you guys all think this is like crazy. They brought this dinosaur in to talk about browsers, but like we had browsers, right? This is like probably Netscape, and I remember saying that like we should put a browser in everyone's desktop, and people are like, "Whoa, this is crazy talk," and they're like, "What are we going to do with it?" And I'm like, "Oh, we'll be able to search the internet, and this and that." And a true story, by the way. And so we tested it in the technology department, which is probably 120 people, and after the first week, I won't tell you the name of every site that people visited, but I kind of reminded everybody that like here are the sites that people visited, and starting next week, I have to give this report to like senior executives. And so the sites that they spent more time on tended to change. But the point is, I think a browser is going to become a lot like AI. I think the fact that you have, a browser, it seems so obvious to all of you, doesn't it? Like you can even imagine like how you would do your jobs with a browser. I think the same thing is going to apply to AI. It's going to be a integrated part of everything you do, relative to like being on the computer. And I think it already almost is if you look at the way the browsers are operating right now, even with Chrome and other things. So anyways, I think that's that. Productivity. How do I measure it? I have no idea. I don't know yet. That's kind of one of the reasons I'm doing these tests. I've got like all these different pilots going to try to determine how we basically sort of, where we identify. I'll tell you this, the number one use case we're starting with is we're an employee knowledge base. In our company in particular, because, it's really challenging actually to understand everything going on in baseball and everything going on to support fans. And so like capturing all that information so anybody can ask any question across whether it's employee handbooks or different knowledge bases or how we just kind of operate with fans and things is, could really be transformational for us and make us much, much more productive. a lot of these questions now go to the domain experts in every department. My hope is that, we eliminate 80% of that, so these people can be more productive in their jobs and have more time to focus on some of the other things that are more strategic. Oh, I'm sorry. I drifted. Sorry about that. Apologies.
Real loud. Baseball is a very statistical sport, and I keep thinking like, how do the technological advancements of AI they impact the world of scouts?
Scouts? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the number one probably example there is in video analytics. So we have about 135 scouts around the globe, at least at the Red Sox. And then obviously we have Liverpool football and Pittsburgh Penguins and things. And so all of those, if you can imagine, track prospects, domestically, internationally. And the ability to be able to retrieve that, we already retrieve the video content and do analytics against it so that we can better assess sort of talent, I think is going to be one example. I think the other thing you'll see, and this doesn't really require AI, but I think AI might be a good feeder for this, is that one of the things, when I was at the Weather Channel, we automated forecasts, and I think sometimes applying the same mindset toward scouting would be applicable, which is we have the scouting reports that go back 20 years or more. One of the things that's interesting in scouting is you could have passed on somebody who became a Hall of Famer, right? And so one of the things it should start to do, that we're already using it for, is to inform scouts of their bias, inherent bias. If I scouted for Roger Clemens, maybe I think every pitcher should be 6'4", 225, and I'd pass on Pedro Martinez and things like that. And so I think, I think you'll find people using it more as a means of being able to kind of look at who's successful and then backing up from that and trying to identify sort of other elements that can help us, choose which prospects might be most effective. It also applies, by the way, to medical and wellness. So we have a very sophisticated kind of medical wellness kind of program which complements sort of player development, like Moneyball, like kinds of analytics and things like that. And I think the two of those together, and I think AI can play a steep role there, I think will be kind of very successful for companies in the future, and especially in sports. Yeah.
I'm Guillermo Martinoligo, freshman from the Dominican Republic. Do you have the same amount of technology in the academies, for example, in the Dominican Republic Academy for the Boston Red Sox?
We do.
And how do you share the videos and the reports from scouts?
That's a good question. Yeah, so we use a couple different methods. It kind of depends where they're located. They could be located anywhere in the globe. Well, to answer your first question, so in Dominican, every club has a Dominican academy. Every major league, so all 30 clubs have a location within the Dominican where they basically have their own ballparks and things. We made the decision a few years ago to have all of the same technology everywhere. So we have kind of ubiquity kind of thing. The reason that's important too is because we want to be able to follow the progress of players through their evolution, hopefully their evolution, from like single A or instructional to hopefully the major leagues and things like that. A lot of it, like the video things, doesn't have to be real time with scouts. So a lot of it's just regular internet connections and sending files, and then we process all that on our end, and then it goes into a system that we designed called Beacon, which is our primary baseball hub for analytics and players and player development and things like that, and then all the analysis is done at that end. Yeah. I learned to write software here. I took some software development classes here, and then I got a part-time job working at a small investment company, and they wanted me to write Pascal, which I think I took a class in, but it was easy. I picked it up, and it was like way back in the day when some of these computers were really early stage, and I was able to kind of like tie we had a portfolio of 450 companies, and they could only meet with them once a year. I think it was once a year because it took so long for them to process all their information. And overnight, we were able to kind of write software where I could download all the stock prices, update all those things, and they would meet with people 4 times a year, so they quadruple their base. And I kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do. The reason software development is, I think, a really good foot in the door is because if you're a developer, you have to understand a little bit of everything. You have to understand sort of like how to design systems for consumption, so UI, UX design. You have to understand the databases that go into those things, which are all, right now, almost all of ours are in the cloud. So you have to understand cloud technologies, and you have to understand, different things. And so I think it makes you a very well-rounded, if that's your, versus like operational, I'm not knocking operational, they're just different jobs. But it's like, I think on the development side, it tends to be, I think people who come from that thing tend to understand problem solving a little bit better, in my experience. And I think it's a good stepping stone. But the more important thing is understanding how to design systems. And answer your last question about what's going to change in the future. I think AI is going to be so successful that, you're still going to need really smart developers, but a lot of people are going to be able to develop in the future. And I think a lot of people that are good at UI, UX design will now have the tools to be able to kind of take those implementations and be able to kind of create code very quickly. You still want engineers to kind of go through all that to make sure it's optimized and things like that. But I think in the future, anybody who's creative should be able to write a book, write a novel. I think people will be able to write software. I think we'll be able to be, if you want to call it an artist, like you'll be able to produce content that you probably wouldn't be able to do with your hands and things like that. So I think it's going to be a very different world, in terms of how that all operates. I think for people who have a technology focus, I think learning how to understand how systems are designed, optimized, and how to sort of meet the needs of the customer, I think are going to go well, serve you well for the future, no matter what the changes are.
Now that we have who has any other questions? So how's AI going to impact creativity? Do you think it's going to take our creativity away or make us even more creative?
Way more creative. I mean, way more. It makes me think of things I never thought of before. Even,
Those cat pictures?
yeah, my cat. I mean, who can do cat pictures? But be able to do those in the past. No, I guess I sort of mean that. I think it's in a great experimental platforms too, and so I think if you're a creative person, it will complement your skills. If you're not that creative, it'll hopefully augment in some ways some skills that maybe that you don't have. And I think the point I made before about I sort of see the technology, at least today's version, as being a great way to sort of jumpstart creativity, innovation, and ultimately it comes down to the person and their ability to be able to, take that to fruition and be able to kind of hopefully design new products or create new capabilities. I think, I think the fact that you'll be able to do things that you could never do before, like I've said before, whether it's like writing software or writing a book or things like that. I know folks right nowadays, like writers, would be semi-horrified by thinking that someone's going to write a book just based on AI. But I don't know. If I took a survey of 20 people and said, do you want to read this really amazing book? I don't know that people care necessarily how it was created. It's still, some authors would say, well, those are my ideas. And, I had helped sort of pulling them all together and writing the words between everything. But I think people are more kind of at the end of the game focused versus sort of understanding how the sausage is made a little bit in certain cases. So.
I have a question for all of you. Just by show of hands, who here uses a tool like Copilot or ChatGPT at least once a week? At least once a day? I'm not asking what you use it for yet. I'm just curious. Just to see who uses. Is there anybody who hasn't played around with any of the AI tools that we've been talking about today yet? Is there anybody who hasn't used it before? Is there a reason why you've been avoiding them, or
You still really use them.
just don't use them yet? For those of you who do use them, how do you find them helpful? Or do you find them helpful? And if so, how?
Just like rather than going through Google regularly, like I just try ChatGPT depending on what the question is. Pretty basic, but that's that.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it much the same way. How do other people use it? I mean, for me, it's a writing companion, a little bit. By the way, when I say writing companion, I mean like my term paper, because I'm not writing term paper, but I mean more like if I'm writing, an email that's complicated, or if I'm writing, even like, honestly, I was writing a thank you note to our department for something we implemented recently, and I wrote it, and then I just threw it into like a Gen AI solution, and it came, and it had different suggestions for verbs and things and different wording, which I mostly ignored. But it also said, oh, you might also want to give some consideration to thanking someone for this. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. And it was like, so I don't, for me, like I tend to think of it not so much a replacement for how I think, but more as a reminder in certain cases. And you can train it. The one thing that's pretty cool about it is these different gen engines, but most people don't know, is you can also, when it gives you feedback, you can also say, like on a 10 scale, what number is this? And try it if you haven't done it. And it'll come back and say, oh, it's about an 8. And you can say, oh, give me a 6. Give me a 4. Give me a 10. And you get a better sense for like kind of the level of sophistication and things that you can do. So it's, I don't know. I want to sort of like, all your English teachers hating on me. But it is sort of a product that, I think in time companies will expect people to have a working knowledge. I think of it more that way, not so much, how you, matriculate through college and the implications of, not doing your own work and things like that are obviously quite different.